Welcome, boys and girls. Christine here with a discussion about the Neferata DLC and the Nagash Lord of the End Times expansion for Warhammer 3. And what Creative Assembly needs to do for both of these in order for them to achieve success. Of course, Neferata and Nagash will always do well as DLCs because they're pretty big characters in the lore, they're very popular on the tabletop, and there's a reason why Neferata and Nagash, in Age of Sigmar for instance, are two of the principal characters, alongside Manfred, but I think Manfred just exists nowadays for people to just have some character that they hate without the question. I mean, I think that's even the reason Nagash brought him back lore-wise, because it's otherwise not something you can justify. Wait, why did Nagash make Manfred one of his lieutenants? You know, the guy who betrayed him and burned the world to a crisp. Well, probably because Nagash finds that amusing, also probably because Nagash always loves to keep a backstabber close to him, so he's kept in peak shape. But anyway, before we talk about specifics of vampire counts and Nagash, which is going to be a combination of all undead, and that's something I think Creative Assembly has made very clear in their trailer, we should talk about core issues of the game. Things like auto-resolve, sieges, campaign pacing, endgame. Now, the endgames is something Creative Assembly has explicitly stated in the reveal of the Nagash Lord of the End Times reveal trailer. But with regards to auto-resolve and sieges, would Creative Assembly tackle those systems in the first place? Or will they just release two DLCs, separate DLCs, Neferata probably over the next 3-4 months, Nagash over 6-7 months, maybe longer? Will they tackle those issues? Well, there's several ways of viewing it. One of the ways you can say is that, yes, they will tackle them. The reason they didn't do so with Tides of Torment is because they saw what happens very clearly in October when you do a small effort on these issues. And they even saw it beforehand with the Proving Grounds, because they did test siege changes, they did improve the AI to a degree, all that. But they also saw how underwhelming it can be and the kind of problems it can cause. And make no mistake, there were issues. So when Nagash especially, I would not necessarily expect changes to sieges and AI would Neferata, maybe small things. But when Nagash, given everything that's going to happen, the changes to campaign map, they would probably implement some of those changes, if not the big package, with the Lord of the End Times expansion. That's the reason I'm calling it an expansion. If you think it's just going to be another DLC, no. It's going to have 4 Legendary Lords, it's going to be more expensive most likely, and it's going to bring about some fundamental changes to the game. Even if it's just the cataclysmic events, aka the end time events, that they're going to add into the game. So that is one aspect. I think the reason they decide not to try more this year is because on one hand they realized what happens when they don't give these kind of things as much focus and attention as they deserve. The other reason is, well, simply put, they got burned hard this year trying to do these things in an underwhelming way, and so they are either not going to deal with them whatsoever, or they're being more careful about it. Those are the reasons, really. And there's also a third reason, which is that packaging it all with Nagash's release does help create genuine excitement for a game. Because if you just trickle things down, and okay, couple things here, couple things there, that's what they tried this year, and it didn't work out. Now imagine if they had done everything like that, like Tomb King's update, Lizardman update, AI updates, together with the release of Tides of Torment. That would have been a very different release for Tides of Torment than what we got. So those are some of the fundamentals. Now let's talk about specifics. With respect to Neferata, if we look at the lore around her, she's the most deceitful of the vampire counts. Of course, you do have Manfred, and Manfred is a special kind of deceitful and backstabber, but Neferata is more diplomatic and nuanced. In fact, her entire storyline, her origin story, the creation of the vampires, it really lies with that kind of path. Diplomacy, spy games, deceit, backstabbing when it's appropriate, all those kind of things. Now, I would hope that Creative Assembly decides to not do another Changeling type campaign with Neferata, where you just have a bunch of events and you have a nothing campaign, and instead use systems more along the lines of, say, Jan Bo, or Karl Franz, or even Tyrion, or Elifanar if you want to go down that specific path, because I think those would work better within the context of the game. The biggest problem with Creative Assembly trying to do all these kind of special campaigns is that it's great to have special campaigns, but how well do they work within the context of the game mechanics? What I would say would be important for Neferata to have would be a better system of diplomacy in the game, just baseline diplomacy. In the sense that vassal agreements are just very easy to do, like you just trade territory that's worth it, and they will just vassalize. And then you don't have any nuance or decision making really to make with vassals, and it kind of makes the AI a lot more passive. So one of the things Neferata herself would use would be a vast improvement in the way diplomacy works. So that's for her, but when we're looking at the vampire counts, well, vampire counts work pretty well from the perspective of gameplay systems on the campaign. So on a campaign, vampire counts have a lot of heroes, have a good economy, have those diplomatic options. Yes, I do think baseline diplomacy should be improved, and making it more interesting, because right now you just get vassals and good job, you've won. But the big problem with the vampire counts is that they struggle from the perspective of sieges and battles, really. Well, struggle is the wrong word, because of course vampire counts are very strong in battle. It's more so how they work. See, their units will disintegrate when they lose their leadership. So you'll lose your entire army if their leadership goes low. This pushes you towards using your very powerful lords and heroes to just win battles on their own. The army is less relevant, and it's especially irrelevant when we're dealing with siege battles. So what vampire counts could really use are certain units with Wallbreaker, or an ability faction-wide, racial-wide, actually, to break down walls. Yes, you can use heroes for that. No, it's not ideal. But yes, sieges need genuine improvements, or at least vampire counts need a way of being able to tackle sieges in a better fashion. Because at the moment, it's really honestly pretty tedious to fight battles in general as the vampire counts. You just get tired of dealing with it constantly. And that's one of the problems that hurts Vlad, Isabella, Kemmler, who are pretty powerful Legendary Lords with good campaign mechanics. It's just like the battles are not especially interesting, and sieges in particular are not really interesting. And this is where I hope Creative Assembly doesn't just copy-paste mod ideas, because mods are constrained by their very nature. No mod creator will tell you otherwise. Every mod creator will say this outright, and they have, that what they do with mods is built on the constraints that they have with the game. And on top of that, when we're talking about mods, one of the things to remember is that mods specifically don't change certain things because they want to be compatible with other mods as well. So that is the kind of framework mods have to work with. That is not, however, something Creative Assembly has to deal with. So improving things like the economy, hero tiers, unit tiers, wall breaker, research tree, etc. Those are things Creative Assembly should do. I really hope that they don't just add Neferata as a campaign with some cool, unique system that doesn't end up really working within the dynamics of the game, because I think that would be a huge disservice to her character and to the race itself. Also, I think if they're going to do Neferata as the DLC, and they have pretty much stated that, and they have shown her in the trailer, it would be a great time to make the Red Duke a free playable legendary lord for the vampire counts in Musalon. Though that could really benefit from improving Bretonia as a campaign area, because yes, it's not especially great. But those are some of the things I hope Creative Assembly deals with the Neferata DLC. Now let's talk about Nagash. As for Nagash himself, Well, one of the things Creative Assembly could do before they release the DLC is set up a bunch of events in-game to bring about his return, likely involving Manfred and Arkhan the Black. If you look at the trailer, it is both Arkhan and Manfred that bring Nagash back. Neferata also had her own role in that particular storyline, so you would have Manfred, Arkhan, and to a lesser extent, Neferata. And then the show begins, because when Nagash did, he was brought back, and it also involves Elfarion, his bringing back in Volkmar, because what ended up occurring with Elfarion is that Manfred and Arkhan kidnapped Tyrion's daughter and were looking to sacrifice her in a ritual to bring back Nagash. They also used Volkmar's body as a vessel to do so. So Nagash in End Times is in the body of Volkmar. So you do have those factions, so you could have some interesting campaign events occurring there with the return of Nagash just before the release of the DLC. And then, of course, Nagash comes back, and you get to have the show taking place with him. Nagash in the End Times invaded Khemri, took it over, defeated etc., and became essentially the god of death in Warhammer 40k, or in Warhammer Total War, or Warhammer Fantasy. And he still is that in Age of Sigmar, because he took over, or took the power of a Mor, essentially, and the equivalent for the Tomb Kings, a different name for the Tomb Kings, but it was essentially the same god. And that obviously created a lot of issues for everyone involved. Now, I believe when we're talking about Nagash, what Creative Assembly should avoid is how the current Nagash mod handles things. Because the way Nagash currently works in the modded version of Warhammer 3 is he's kind of like Warriors of Chaos to an extent. He has Horde armies, or more like Beastmen really. He has Horde armies. He can take most settlements or minor settlements as outposts, bigger outposts for regular provincial capitals, and then he has these places of death, which are essentially dark fortresses. I don't think that's a good system, because it pushes you as a player against the way the game's played. Like, we have empire building. We do need to actually deal with territory and care about it, as opposed to just caring about certain specific locations that we then take over, fortify them, and then do rituals. Because in Nagash's entire campaign in the Legions of Nagash mod is you take over these locations, and they're all over the world, including Quintex, and that's an annoying one. But you take over these locations, and then once you have taken over these locations, what you end up doing is a ritual at every individual location, which hurts you diplomatic relations-wise. So it's best to just not do these, or only do a couple of them. Like in this case, I've done Morkheim and Nagashazar, but only do a couple of them, or maybe only one of them. Really, Morkheim is probably the best. Do that ritual, and then wait on everything else, and then do all of them at once. Because once you start doing these rituals, what will end up occurring is you get an event, a choice over here where we at the beginning of the end, where all important locations are going to be attacked. And once you've done that, you can then do the final step. This was, by the way, what Nagash almost did in the End Times. How was he stopped? Well, Ikiclaw basically blew up the Black Pyramid in Sylvania. Yes, Nuclear Rat, his best rat. Really, the Skaven saved the world from Nagash. And of course, helped Chaos, but kind of funny when you think of it in Nagash. The Skaven, the most dastardly, cowardly race in the entire setting, who betray everyone and call it lunch, were the true heroes against Nagash. And I'm saying that without any level of irony. The Skaven sacrificed a lot to be able to stop Nagash, even in his origin story. So it would be hilarious if we got Tankwol, Ikiclaw just showing up to try and stop Nagash. But what I think is important is we need to have a campaign that's not just about these critical locations and rituals, that's more dynamic, that plays well within the current context of the game. Sure, you can talk about auto-resolve, endgame, cataclysmic events, etc., but Also, AI, how the AI works, because right now the way the AI works is it gets a series of cheats at the beginning of a campaign, but that's all they get. So it's not scalable. You get an inverted difficulty curve, which from my view is always one of the bigger problems Creative Assembly should resolve. Difficulty should be more gradual, not like, oh, the hardest part of the campaign is the early portion, and then once you deal with that, you've won. And yes, also tied to vassalization. Because one of the things I'm sure Creative Assembly will probably use to some extent is this idea that you can look at undead factions and use Nagash as well to dominate them. You do this with Warpstone here, but basically you dominate undead factions and they become your vassals. And of course, vassals are not necessarily the best system in the game. So there's ways they can do it right, like various events, storyline, narrative campaign, and they've talked about this in their video on the subject. But I certainly hope we don't get another narrative campaign in the same vein as, say, The Changeling or what they've done with Tides of Torment. But that would be my perspective. Costin signing out. Stay tuned for more. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. And let me know what you guys think. What do you guys think about how Creative Assembly should do all of these things? Stay tuned.